I still remember the exact moment I met Emily. It was one of those serendipitous encounters you only hear about in movies. I was stationed in Canada at the time, taking a brief respite from my Navy SEAL duties. I walked into a small cafe on a snowy evening, looking for nothing more than a cup of coffee to fight the chill. And there she was, Emily, sitting by the window, absorbed in a book, her auburn hair catching the soft light like flames frozen in time. What started as a polite exchange about the weather soon turned into hours of conversation. Emily had a knack for making you feel like you were the only person in the room. It wasn't long before we were inseparable. After a whirlwind romance, we moved to the US, got married, and had 2 beautiful kids. She landed a coveted job at a prestigious advertising agency, while I continued my demanding career as a SEAL. We built a life together that seemed almost too perfect. But, as they say, the cracks often form beneath the surface, hidden from view. It was a Friday evening in December when things first began to feel off. Emily's office was hosting their annual Christmas party, and she insisted I didn't need to pick her up, that I should stay home with the kids instead. Our youngest, Ava, had caught a nasty cold, and I agreed it made sense for me to stay back. But something about her insistence lingered with me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. At around 10 p.m., Ava's fever spiked. I didn't think twice about it. I bundled her up and drove to the party to fetch Emily so we could take Ava to the ER if needed. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how loud the music was, spilling out into the quiet night. I made my way inside, scanning the crowd for Emily. That's when I saw her. She wasn't at a table or mingling with her colleagues. No, she was standing near the bar, laughing at something a younger man, a coworker, perhaps, had said. And then she did it. She leaned in close, her hand brushing his arm, and hugged him. Not the kind of casual hug you'd give a coworker. No, this was different. Intimate. Comfortable. For a moment, the air left my lungs. My entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. But I couldn't cause a scene, not with Ava asleep in the car. I took a deep breath and walked straight up to her. "Emily," I called out, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Her smile froze when she turned and saw me. The young man stepped back, clearly sensing the shift in energy. Emily's face flushed, and she stammered something about me not needing to be there. I cut her off, saying simply, "Ava's sick. We need to go." She nodded quickly, mumbling an excuse to the man as she grabbed her coat. But as we walked out of the party, hand in hand, the warmth of her touch felt foreign. Alien. That was the moment I realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. Emily sat in the passenger seat, nervously tapping her fingers on her knee. I glanced at her a few times, hoping she'd offer an explanation, but she just stared out the window, pretending I wasn't there. Ava whimpered softly in the back seat, her tiny face flushed with fever, and that gave me a reason to keep my thoughts buried for the moment. When we got home, Emily rushed to prepare some cold compresses while I gave Ava her medicine. We worked together in silence, like two strangers who just happened to occupy the same space. Once Ava was asleep, Emily excused herself, saying she was exhausted from the party. She didn't even kiss me goodnight. I stayed up for hours after she went to bed, sitting in the dark with only the glow of the television for company. My mind replayed the scene at the party over and over again. The way she hugged him. The way she laughed, leaning in like they shared a secret. It wasn't just friendly. No, it was something more. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Emily had always been outgoing and warm with people. But deep down, a nagging voice whispered something I didn't want to hear. What if there's more to this? The next day, I decided to test the waters. Over breakfast, I casually brought up the party. "You seemed to be having fun last night," I said, keeping my tone neutral as I buttered some toast. Emily's head snapped up. What do you mean? Her reaction was a red flag. Too defensive. Too fast. I shrugged, pretending not to notice. I mean, it looked like a good time. That guy you were talking to seemed friendly. She hesitated, then forced a laugh. Oh, you mean Ryan? He's my new boss. He was just welcoming me to the team. Welcoming you? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Yes, she said, her voice a little too firm. It's part of the company culture. They're very big on making sure everyone feels included. I nodded, biting into my toast to mask the rising heat in my chest. She wasn't lying outright, but she wasn't telling me the whole truth either. I could feel it. Over the next few days, my suspicions grew. Emily started coming home later than usual, blaming late-night meetings or last-minute deadlines. She was glued to her phone, smiling at texts she never shared with me. And when I'd ask about her day, her answers felt rehearsed, as if she'd practiced them beforehand. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I found myself staring at her phone on the nightstand. I've always respected her privacy, but this time, the urge was too strong. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. And the new passcode she'd set up a week ago wasn't something she'd shared with me. That was the moment it hit me, Emily was hiding something. I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife, the woman I'd built my life around, was no longer the same person I thought I knew. Over the next few days, I found myself watching her more closely, studying her movements, her words, and even the smallest gestures. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. If there was one thing being a Navy SEAL had taught me, it was how to trust your instincts. And right now, mine were screaming at me. It started with little things. Emily began wearing perfume to work, the kind she only used on date nights with me. She started choosing outfits that were slightly more daring, more form-fitting than her usual professional attire. At first, I chalked it up to her wanting to make a good impression at her job. But then I found the receipts, high-end lingerie from a boutique downtown, dated just a day before the Christmas party. It wasn't a gift for me. That much was clear. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something concrete to confirm what my gut was already telling me. So, I turned to someone I trusted, my best friend, Jake. Jake and I had been through hell together during our SEAL days. If there was one person who could help me navigate this, it was him. We met at a local diner on a cold Tuesday afternoon, away from prying eyes and familiar faces. I need your help, I said after we exchanged small talk. Jake leaned back in the booth, his sharp eyes narrowing. What's going on? I hesitated, then said the words I'd been dreading. I think Emily's cheating on me. His expression darkened. What makes you say that? I laid it all out for him, the hug at the party, the late nights, the lingerie, the secretive behavior. By the time I was done, Jake's jaw was clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. Listen, he said, his voice low and steady. If she's messing around, you deserve to know the truth. You want me to look into it? Jake wasn't just a friend, he was a man with connections. His post-SEAL career involved private security work, and he had the skills and resources to dig deeper than I ever could on my own. I nodded. Yeah. I need to know. He reached across the table and clasped my shoulder. I've got your back, brother. That night, I told Emily I had some training exercises coming up and would be out of town for a couple of days. It wasn't entirely a lie, I often had to leave on short notice for work. She barely blinked when I told her, which only added to the weight in my chest. Once I was gone, Jake would keep an eye on her, tracking her movements and gathering evidence if there was any to find. I didn't expect the results to come so quickly. 2 days later, Jake called me while I was still at the base. I answered on the first ring. You sitting down? He asked. What did you find? My stomach churned. Jake hesitated, and that pause alone told me everything. She met with him last night. Her boss. Ryan. They had dinner at a place downtown, pretty cozy looking. Afterward, they didn't exactly head home. I followed them to a hotel. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the blood drain from my face as I gripped the phone tighter. You're sure? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm sure, Jake said. I got pictures. I didn't want to send them until I talked to you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The confirmation was like a sharp blade cutting through me. All the signs I'd ignored, all the excuses I'd made for her, came crashing down at once. What do you want me to do? Jake asked, his tone gentle now. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. Send me everything you've got. I need to see it. I'm on it, he said. But Mark, don't do anything crazy, okay? I hung up without answering. Emily was no longer the woman I thought she was. But what was worse? The war inside me, the part of me that still loved her despite everything. What came next, I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let this end without answers. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, images of Emily and Ryan flashed in my mind, his hands on her, the way she must have looked at him the way she used to look at me. By morning, my anger had morphed into something else, something colder. Determination. When Jake sent me the pictures, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. The images were damning, Emily and Ryan entering the hotel together, their hands intertwined, the kind of smile on her face that she used to reserve only for me. Seeing them made it real in a way that words never could. But I wasn't going to confront her at home. No, this needed to happen on my terms, in a way that left no room for lies or manipulation. So I waited, pretending nothing was wrong, playing the part of the oblivious husband. Christmas was fast approaching, and Emily's company was hosting another event, a more formal affair at a downtown banquet hall. She was excited, chatting about the decorations, the guest list, the catered dinner. I played along, asking questions, feigning interest. Meanwhile, my plan was taking shape. The night of the event, I offered to drive her there. She agreed, probably grateful for my sudden enthusiasm. As she got out of the car, dressed in a crimson gown that clung to her figure, she turned to blow me a kiss. It took everything in me not to flinch. I waited until she disappeared inside, then parked the car in a nearby lot and doubled back. I slipped inside unnoticed, staying in the shadows as I scanned the crowd. There she was, laughing with her co-workers, a glass of wine in her hand. And then Ryan appeared, sidling up to her with a grin that made my blood boil. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her blush. That was all the confirmation I needed. I approached them slowly, weaving through the crowd like a predator stalking its prey. I caught Ryan's eye first, and the smug grin on his face faltered when he saw me. Emily turned to follow his gaze, and her face turned ghostly pale. Enjoying the party? I asked, my voice calm and even. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Ryan glanced around, likely weighing his options for escape. I didn't give him the chance. You two look cozy, I continued, raising my voice just enough for nearby guests to hear. Must be nice to have such a welcoming boss. Murmurs spread through the crowd, people turning to watch the unfolding scene. Emily's eyes glistened with tears, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Ryan tried to step between us, his hand on my chest, but I shoved him back, harder than necessary. Emily grabbed my arm, pleading, Mark, please, let's not do this here. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the stranger she'd become. You didn't mind doing it here, I replied coldly. Ryan tried again, his voice firm but shaky. I think you should leave, Mark. I turned to him, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. Or what? You'll call security? He nodded, reaching for his phone. But he underestimated me. The training, the discipline, it all kicked in. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it until he dropped the phone with a yelp. The crowd gasped, some of them pulling out their own phones to record the spectacle. "Mark, stop!" Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not after what they'd done. I pulled Ryan closer, my voice a deadly whisper. "You think you can just take what's mine? Destroy my family?" I saw the fear in his eyes, and it felt like the first taste of justice. He tried to pull away, but I tightened my grip. The first punch landed square on his jaw, a sickening crunch echoing through the hall. He stumbled back, clutching his face, blood seeping between his fingers. The next few moments were a blur, security rushing in, Emily screaming, the crowd either scattering or cheering. But none of it mattered. In that moment, it was just me and him, a man who had stolen something precious from me, now paying the price. When it was over, and Ryan lay crumpled on the floor, I turned to Emily one last time. "I hope he was worth it," I said, my voice hollow. Then I walked out, leaving her to pick up the pieces of the life she had shattered. I drove home that night, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving me with a strange, hollow ache. The house was quiet when I arrived, just the steady hum of the heater and the faint snores of my sleeping kids. I stood in the doorway of their room for a moment, watching them. They were so innocent, so unaware of how their world was about to change. Emily didn't come home that night. I wasn't surprised. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages. Some were from coworkers who'd seen the scene at the party, others from mutual friends who'd heard the rumors. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to face the world yet. Around noon, Emily finally walked through the door, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked at me, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Save it," I said, my voice cold. "I don't need excuses." "Mark, she started, but I cut her off. "You made your choice, Emily. Now you'll live with it." Her tears started again, but I felt nothing. Whatever love I'd had for her had been buried under layers of betrayal. Later that afternoon, I called a lawyer. The next chapter of my life had already begun. The days that followed were a blur of silence and avoidance. Emily tried to talk to me once or twice, but I shut her down every time. What could she possibly say? Sorry. Sorry doesn't erase betrayal. She moved into the guest room without a word, and we communicated only about the kids. Every time I saw her, I felt a mix of rage and sadness, like I was mourning the death of someone who was still alive. One evening, I came home from the gym to find her sitting at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I know you called a lawyer," she said quietly. "I found out today." I didn't respond, just leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. "I get it," she continued, her voice trembling. "I deserve it. I need to explain." I let out a bitter laugh. "Explain what?" "That you threw away 11 years for some thrill. That you put our kids' future on the line for your boss." Her head dropped, and her shoulders shook. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "Then what was it, Emily?" "Because I can't think of a single reason that justifies what you did." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I was lonely, Mark. You're always gone. The kids, the house, it's all on me. And when you're home, it's like you're not even here." Ryan made me feel seen, like I mattered. Her words stung, but they didn't excuse her actions. I shook my head. "You should have come to me, Emily. Not him." "I know," she said, sobbing. "I know I screwed up. But I love you. I want to fix this. I stared at her, my heart torn between anger and the faint, lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be salvaged. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some things, once broken, can never be repaired. I'll think about it, I said flatly, and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. Emily's words haunted me for days. She claimed to love me, to want to fix things, but how could I trust her again? Every time I looked at her, I saw her with Ryan. The thought of them together was like a splinter buried deep under my skin, impossible to ignore, impossible to remove. I needed clarity. Something to tell me if there was even a sliver of truth in her plea to save our marriage. And so, late one night, after everyone had gone to bed, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her things. Her phone was locked, but her laptop wasn't. As I scrolled through her emails and messages, I found exactly what I was looking for, and exactly what I was afraid of. There were emails between her and Ryan. Dozens of them. Some professional, others far from it. One in particular stood out, dated a week before the Christmas party. I can't wait to see you tonight. Mark doesn't suspect a thing. I hate lying to him, but I can't stop thinking about you. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. All her talk about being lonely, about wanting to fix things, it was just another lie. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, the weight of it all crushing down on me. I thought about confronting her right then, but what was the point? She'd already destroyed everything. Instead, I made a decision. I forwarded the incriminating emails to my lawyer and added a note, "This ends now." The next morning, I sat across from my lawyer in his downtown office. He skimmed through the forwarded emails, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm but firm. "This is enough," he said. "Enough for divorce, enough for custody leverage. We can move forward immediately." Hearing it out loud felt surreal. Divorce. Custody. Words that once felt foreign, now felt inevitable. I nodded. "Do it." By the time I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, packing the kids' lunches. She looked up when I walked in, her face etched with uncertainty. "You're home early." I didn't respond, just stood there for a moment, staring at her. She must have sensed something was wrong because her hands froze mid-motion. "We need to talk," I said finally, my tone cold. Her eyes darted nervously. "About what?" I placed my phone on the counter, opened to one of the emails. "About this." She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. For a moment, it seemed like she might deny it, but then she just sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "Mark. I trusted you," I said, my voice low but sharp. "I built a life with you. I fought for this family, and this is how you repay me." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, you did," I snapped. "And now, you're going to deal with the consequences." Her head shot up, panic flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I met with a lawyer this morning. The papers are being drafted. You'll be served by the end of the week." She gasped, shaking her head. "No. Mark, please. Don't do this. Think about the kids." "I am thinking about the kids," I said, my voice steady. "They deserve better than this. Better than seeing their mother betray their father." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't let them sway me. I'd made my decision, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I had expected anger from Emily, maybe defiance, but what I got was something worse, desperation. She tried everything to make me reconsider. She left notes on the bathroom mirror, apologizing and promising to be better. She made my favorite meals, ones I hadn't had in years. She even suggested therapy, though the words felt hollow coming from someone who had kept me in the dark for so long. I kept my distance, keeping every interaction short and cold. I had to. If I let her get too close, I feared I might falter, and I couldn't afford to falter now. The papers arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I handed them to her in the living room, watching her face as she unfolded them. Her hands trembled as she read through the lines, her tears staining the pages. "You're really doing this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am. But I love you," she cried. "I made a mistake, Mark. I messed up, but it doesn't mean I don't love you." I shook my head, the weight of her words cutting through me. "Love isn't what you say, Emily. It's what you do. And what you did, it broke us." Her sobs filled the silence, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. That evening, I packed a bag and stayed with Jake for the night. He didn't say much, just handed me a beer and turned on the game. It was exactly what I needed, a moment to forget, even if only for a little while. The next morning, Emily texted me. "Let's sit down and talk. For the kids." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Tomorrow." I owed her that much, at least. The next evening, I sat across from Emily at the dining table, the house eerily quiet with the kids staying at a friend's. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She broke the silence first. "I know I can't undo what I've done, Mark. But I need you to understand, it wasn't about you." I scoffed. "Not about me. You betrayed me, Emily. You betrayed this family. How could that not be about me?" Her lip trembled, and she wiped at her eyes. "I was lost, okay? You're always gone, physically and emotionally. And Ryan, he filled a void." I slammed my hand on the table, making her flinch. "So you filled your void with him instead of talking to me? Instead of fixing what was wrong? Do you even hear yourself?" She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know I was wrong. I know I ruined everything. But please, please don't take the kids away from me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The kids. They were the only reason I hadn't completely burned everything to the ground. They were the innocent ones in all of this, and they deserved better than being stuck in a war zone between their parents. "I haven't made any final decisions about custody," I said, my voice quieter now. "But if you want to be in their lives, you need to get your act together. No more lies. No more secrets. And you'd better be the mother they deserve." She nodded furiously. "I will. I promise." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "This marriage is over, Emily. But that doesn't mean you're done being their mom. We'll figure out a way to co-parent, for them." Her sobs grew softer, and for the first time, she looked truly remorseful. "Thank you," she whispered. "For giving me that chance." I stood up, the weight of the last few weeks settling over me like a heavy cloak. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," I said. "The kids will be back in the morning. We need to be civil for their sake." She nodded silently, and as I walked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd finally taken control of my life. Sadness for the love that had once been, now shattered beyond repair. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Emily got shared custody, and we split the assets evenly. I kept the house for the kids, while she moved into an apartment nearby. Some days were harder than others, but over time, the pain began to fade. I focused on my children, on rebuilding my life, and on rediscovering the man I used to be before betrayal changed everything. And as for Emily, I don't know if she ever found what she was looking for. But I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't going to let her mistake define me.